Over a decade ago, the Nissan Leaf set a precedent for affordable all-electric vehicles, but now we've got a lot more options to choose from. So in this review, we'll be looking to see how the Nissan Leaf compares to some of its rivals, and indeed if it's worth it. Now the car starts from around £23,000 in the UK. If however you go for the larger 62 kilowatt hour variant, in other words a longer range variant, that will start from around £33,000. Now if you'd like a detailed comparison between different level trims and what they offer, do check out our written review. Will be down in the description below, and also down there you'll find a link to our Instagram, and yes, that's a shameless plug, but if you do use that social media platform, we'd very much appreciate a follow. It's at TotallyEVnet. So kicking things off, let's talk about the exterior design, and I know this is subjective, but I really do like the design of the Nissan Leaf. It's a massive improvement over its predecessor, and in comparison to some of its rivals, I think it does a great job. At the front you've got a sporty look, and yes, while it won't compete with a Skyline GTR, it does look pretty sleek. At the side you're treated with 16 or 17 inch alloys, and you've got body coloured side skirts and wheel arches, and at the rear of the car there's nothing really to report other than the fact that Nissan have kept design in mind as well. The only thing worth bearing in mind, and the only kind of negative point, is that if you do want to customise the colour, it's going to set you back £575 up to £1,100, which is quite a steep asking price in comparison to some of its competitors out there. Now moving inside the cabin, the same couldn't be quite said. It feels a little bit old school. While it's not bad in any sort of domain, it just doesn't really stand out in comparison to the rest of the crowd. What I will say is that the 8-inch infotainment display is also pretty old school with its buttons and its look. On the plus side, you can spruce things up with the inclusion of Android Auto or Apple CarPlay at your disposal. You can use it to navigate or indeed play back your music. Now speaking about music, you've got a 7-speaker Bose system, at least in the model that we've got over here. Now if you'd like a detailed audio review of the Nissan Leaf, do check it out on your pop-up banner or indeed down in the description below. What I'll say in a nutshell is that it does a competent job, but again doesn't really stand out in comparison to other systems out there. Now moving past the screen, you've got physical climate control buttons, which are always a plus sign. You've got a USB jack and auxiliary input and a 12-volt cigarette lighter, and you've got a little cradle for your smartphone, although it's not a wireless charging enabled pad over here. You've then got an interesting look when it comes to the gear lever. It's somewhat reminiscent of an actual manual gear lever, or indeed a automatic one where you kind of shift up and shift down. So it works in the same sort of respect, and it's very intuitive to use, and I do very much like it. Under that you've got 2 cup holder spaces and a little compartment storage as well at the center console. Also, it's also worth bearing in mind that you have got an instrument cluster which is very comprehensive and bright. It's a mix between old school and new school. In other words, you've got the analog dials and an LCD display to give you the digital information. You can customize it to a certain degree, and as for the steering wheel, it's comprehensively laid out. You've got media controls on the left hand side, and you've got, let's say, the cruise control buttons and safety systems on the right hand side. As for storage within the cabin, you have also got storage by the doors where you can fit a 500ml bottle, and the same could be said for the rear, where it's a little bit more limited but still very much practical. Now speaking about storage, let's talk about boot capacity, and here you're treated with one of the largest boots that you can find in an all-electric saloon or hatchback. You've got 435 litres to be specific. Pop down the seats, you've got 1,176 litres. Now the latter figure is still very impressive, but doesn't compete with the likes of the Renault Zoe or the Ioniq Electric, which offer north of 1,300 litres. Nevertheless, the thing that I've really got an issue with is the actual boot design. So let's take for example the boot lid. If you were to keep it intact in order for you to preserve some security from thieves, what you'll find is if you're reaching at the back of the boot, your head might hit if you don't duck in terms of the top of the boot lid. If you were to remove the boot lid and pop down the seats, what you'll find is a somewhat odd setup. You've got a raised boot lip, then you've got a lowered boot floor, and then you've got the base box which sits there, the Bose base box if you have it in the certain trim that you choose. And then you've got a far larger raised rear seats. In other words, you haven't got a flat pane, in other words, giving you access to easily slide in and out goods. Now this might not pose an issue for a lot of people. In my case, it doesn't really matter because I've just got, let's say, my weekly shop if I have to pop it at the back. But for some people, for example, those people who are pet owners who have, let's say, cages and things like that, they're taking their animals somewhere, or they're, let's say, bikers and they're taking their mountain bikes in and out, the Nissan Leaf ends up just being a little bit more awkward to access and use on a daily basis. At least that's just my opinion, so do let me know in the comments below what you make of it. Now, what Nissan has really nailed, however, is the seat comfort. Specifically at the back, the seats are cushiony, soft, and it's really nice to see. The same could be said at the front of the cabin. Legroom is also plentiful, so I'm just under 6 foot. I've got no issues whatsoever. And as for headroom, it's a little bit more limited at the back, where let's say if you're 6'2", 6'4", you'll struggle to fit comfortably at the rear. But at the front, given you've got adjustable seats, there's no issues whatsoever. You've also got seat warmers as well throughout all the seats, depending on, of course, what trim you go for. Now, elsewhere, the 4 doors open up pretty wide, and as you can fit 5 occupants within the vehicle, as there is a center seat which has a seat belt, it makes it pretty practical for those people who have, let's say, small size families, or indeed those people who are taking this car out and, let's say, transporting people. The thing I will say, however, is that if you don't have a 5th occupant, there's no way of bringing down the middle seat for you to have a armrest or indeed having cup holders, something that some of its competitors offer, and make it just a little bit more of a bettered experience for those people sitting at the back, again, if you don't have a middle occupant. Now, on the subject of comfort, let's get on to the actual driving comfort. Now, first off, in terms of the steering wheel, it is a little bit stiffer than some of its competitors, but that's not to say it is hard to maneuver. It makes very light work of inner city commutes, specifically if you're on eco mode. As for the actual suspension, it sits in a middle ground of not being as soft as something like the Renault Zoe, but nor is it as hard as something like the Ioniq Electric. It means therefore you can glide over speed bumps while at the same time also benefiting from, well, reduced body roll when you're going at speed on country roads. It just makes for a pleasurable experience, and coupled with the soft cushiony seats that I just mentioned before, it just makes for a great overall all-round experience when it comes to the actual driving comfort. Furthermore, visibility is not an issue. Unlike the Ioniq Electric, which has a bit of limited visibility at the rear, the Nissan Leaf is just really great no matter where you look. From left and right, and indeed in your rear view window, you've got no issues whatsoever. This also does couple up when it comes to parking, because you've got front and rear parking sensors and a rear view camera, at least in the trim that I am testing right here, which just makes it, again, all that bit easier when it comes to parking in a parking lot, or indeed if you're going to go into a normal parking spot in terms of parallel parking, at least in the UK, where you've got limited amount of space. Now, onto performance, the car has 160 kilowatts of power. That equates to around 214 horsepower. Now, in terms of 0 to 62 time, Nissan claims 6.9 seconds, at least for the Nissan Tecna. But in my test using the V-Box Sport, I found it from 0 to 60 to achieve 7.19 seconds. So in other words, it's pretty decent, but it's not going to be the fastest car in the world. But likewise, this is not really a sports car, and yet it provides plenty of excitement when you make a getaway at the lights. Specifically coming from a combustion engine vehicle, I think a lot of people will be pleasantly surprised. That all-electric power is just something that you really have to experience for yourself. Now, the only thing I will say, however, is that with that power at your disposal, which is around 340 Newton meters of torque, it makes for the car to suffer from a lot of front wheel spin, and that's purely really apparent when you put your foot down to the metal on the accelerator pedal. Here, the amount of power that's delivered to the front wheels, as is a front wheel drive system, make for a somewhat dangerous experience, specifically if you're on a little bit wetter roads or a little bit slippier roads. Let's say you're on the country roads, and essentially you just have to tailor that accelerator pedal slowly and not just put your foot down to the metal and just expect it to be fine. Now, I did experience this problem on the Ioniq Electric as well. However, the Nissan Leaf is just even more severe in this domain and just makes it for a little bit of a more frightening experience when the car is wobbling from left and right and the front 2 wheels are struggling constantly for grip. So just bear that in mind if you're coming to the Nissan Leaf for the first time. If you're going to go for a test drive, just be mindful if you put your foot down to the metal. Speaking about its pedal, let's talk about that one pedal approach, or the E-pedal, that can be activated by the center console. Now the E-pedal was something that Nissan came up with and essentially allows you to have, well, as the name might suggest, a one pedal driving approach, and Nissan have really nailed it in this department. If I want to come to a complete stop over here, I've got the E-pedal mode activated and it essentially just comes to a complete stop, as you might expect, essentially allowing you to have a single pedal approach and having to not resort to the brake pedal as much. Of course, if it comes to an emergency braking, or if you have to come to a stop more briskly, then you can do so by pressing on the brake pedal. Now, of course, if you don't like that, you can fully disable it if you so wish, and you can kind of tailor it to some degree. Here, if you were to enable B mode, which is essentially a way of regenerative braking, a little bit more harsher than drive mode, then it means that you will not come to a complete stop, but you will slow down a little bit faster than with all the systems disabled. It can be a little bit confusing because you've got B mode, drive mode, and you've got E-pedal mode. So if you were to combine them, in other words, if you have the B mode activated and the E-pedal mode, it means that essentially you will come to a quicker stop when you lift your foot off the accelerator pedal. And to throw the spanner in the works, you've also got normal mode and eco mode. There's no sport mode, by the way, as you might expect of a car of its class, but nevertheless, these two modes are the two drive modes you can choose from, and eco mode essentially means it loosens up on the accelerator pedal and makes things a little less responsive in order for you to be as energy efficient as possible. I personally preferred using it on normal mode because the accelerator pedal is just that little bit more responsive, as you can see, whereas on eco mode it's just a little bit lazier, which doesn't bring a smile to my face as much when I am getting away from the light or trying to do an overtake maneuver. Now, all of this is to get as much range as possible from the car, and right now we're on the motorway on a relatively cold day in the UK, and therefore you'd expect the range to be a little bit lowered in comparison to a hot summer's day where you don't need, let's say, the climate controls. Despite this fact, during my test when it was pretty cold, a little bit wet, and I was just doing mixed driving conditions, the car achieved around 190 to 200 miles. Now bear in mind, I have got the 62 kilowatt hour variant over here, so the 40 kilowatt hour variant will obviously achieve less because it's just got lower battery capacity. But what I'm trying to say over here is that you are getting decent range, and it's not far off the 238 or 239 odd mile claim that Nissan have on the 62 kilowatt hour variant. Now, of course, this is an electric vehicle, so you can recharge it by plugging it in, and the ports are found at the front. You've got a shadow mode input which will take around 90 minutes from 20% to 80%, and that's using a 50 kilowatt input, while the type 2 port is limited to 6.6 kilowatts of input, therefore meaning that if you want to plug it into a faster charger and it doesn't have 50 kilowatts, for example, and you're using a type 2 port, then unfortunately you can't benefit from, let's say, a three-phase power supply. So in this respect, it will take a whopping 11.5 hours to charge from empty to full. So you might want to make sure that you are planning your journey specifically in the morning and that you're topped up, specifically if you don't have access to a fast charge DC input. Now, as for safety systems, you've got blind spot assist, which works really well, and rear cross traffic alert, alerting you when you're pulling out of a parking space and you haven't noticed like pedestrians or oncoming traffic. However, I'm not too much fan of the cruise control, which obviously does its job, but when it comes to trying to adjust the speed, it essentially gets sometimes a little bit confused by picking up road signs and thinking that, well, that's the speed that you should be driving at. So for example, we're on 50 miles an hour zone now, and sometimes it'll pick up a slip road at 20 and 30 and try and reduce the speed, which just leaves you a little bit baffled. Elsewhere, in terms of the emergency brake assist, this somewhat caught me off guard sometimes, because while I was paying attention to the road and looking in front of me, it would sometimes just try and brake really suddenly, and it just really baffled me as to why this was happening. So I just completely disabled it and just didn't use that function. As for lane keep assistance, again, this kind of pings you from left and right, and the system where it tries to give you a little bit of steering assist in order to try and keep you in lane does a decent job, but ultimately sometimes forgets that you are drifting off lane, specifically if you haven't put your indicators on, and therefore just gives you kind of like a gentle nudge, and sometimes just completely forgets and you'll be drifting off lanes. And I tried this on a pretty empty motorway, and I found myself well, just not impressed by the systems that Nissan have used over here. And this all leads me on to my verdict. What do I make about the Nissan Leaf? Well, unlike its past, now you've got a lot more competitors to choose from. For example, if you want something that's quite practical, you've got the Renault Zoe. If you want something that's futuristic, both in terms of its inside and exterior design, you've got the Honda E. If you want something that looks premium in the inside, you've got the Hyundai Ioniq Electric. And if you want something that's affordable, you've got the VW e-up or the Seat Mii Electric. Truthfully, there are so many options to choose from, and there's no right or wrong answer. Just a thing worth bearing in mind is that the Nissan Leaf is still a good all-rounder, but fails to stand out in any sort of particular domain over its major rivals. So that's just my thoughts and opinions about it. Do let me know in the comments below what you make of it. And of course, if you did like this detailed review, do drop a like, subscribe to see more, and of course favorite and share if you feel that this video will help a family and friend make an informed buying decision. All right, from me and the bird behind me somewhere up in the trees, take care and bye-bye.